exactly.
And if I don't stick that last chord, it isn't because I haven't sweated blood to do it right. So just understand.
You're gonna get it. You can't miss it after practicing that many times, right?
I can.
That's what I always tell myself is I'm like with the Mozart piece, I'm like, I'm going to practice that shift like 20 times today. I'm just gonna do the shift over and over and over and over. And I get it, and then the next time we play, it's like, oh, I missed the shift again.
Well, thank you for that humanity awareness thing. Here we go. Let's see how we do. Okay, so I think I need to understand here before we go.
Yeah.
Do you want to, it feels to me that you want to go more slowly.
Sure.
I'm rushing it a little bit. I'm a little bit ahead of you.
Okay.
So we just go a little slower.
Shall I go a little faster to try it?
No, that's okay. I think I like the richness of this
Okay.
song. And I think maybe I have been pushing it.
Sure.
Because it's not supposed to be a fast song at all.
No, but it's easier, I think, to push it when you're doing all of the movement that you're doing.
That's
So,
what
you
I
know.
have to train myself to slow up a little bit. All right, let's try to get.
Yep. My bad.
What do we do?
Oh, man.
How about 15?
Okay. Well, other than my mistake, that sounded really nice. And I didn't notice any off tune on your double stop, so.
Okay. All right. You want to do it one more time for the
Sure.
fun of it?
Yep.
This is such a pretty song.
It
We just
is.
almost have to. We decided, Carol, that. I love it. Here's the prettiest smile. All right, here we go.
actually doing that with my fourth finger. Yeah, yeah, I'm working on that. I told you, I'm really, really trying to get my vibrato working.
That is no easy thing. No, seriously.
I know, I'm really happy with how it's turning out too. I feel like just a couple weeks ago, I finally kind of got over a hump with it a little bit, where it's like finally it feels like it's starting to click. So that's always fun when that
I'm
happens.
delighted to hear that. That is such a nice thing to be able to have.
Right.
Whittling down.
Oh, you know what? Maybe I should not pack it really up. Or at least, leave it ready to go.
I have it.
I was just planning on eating up Carol's gathering music time and then being done.
See this thing here?
Hello. Good. How about you? Good. Good. Yes, I did notice that the other day. Are you enjoying it? I'm glad.
I need all these assistants.
It looks very beautiful.
Well, it doesn't go with the color as well as
Sure.
when you order it online, it looks more black than you see red on mine. Because I like to pick them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I hate that. That's how those things are shipped in the first position.
Right.
Here.
And I need some control.
Right.
This gives me a little bit of control.
And it just helps too. Like I think when you know that that's not going to happen, you can hit those shifts more confidently, and it just helps everything. Oh, it was fun. It was okay. So apparently, last night, the two teams that played, this was like their final, one of their final games of the season, and the Sioux Falls team and this team that they played, I don't even remember, are the 1 and 2 ranked seeds for the entire like half of the country. So, anyways, they were fighting over being the #1 spot, basically. So, anyways, Sioux Falls ended up losing, but it was a really, really fun game. I definitely was like, you know what? Ellen and I need to go to these more often because it's fun and we got our tickets for $7. So it's like, yeah, it was fun. How about you? How was your night?
Good morning and welcome to today's worship service. We're grateful that you're here today. My name is Janet Coonsey. I'm the service coordinator for today here at All Souls Church, where our mission is to seek truth, practice love, and celebrate life. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you've been a member for a long time, you are welcome here. Whatever faiths you have known or not known, or whatever your heritage, you are welcome here. Whatever questions you hold, whatever truths you seek, whatever sorrow you have known, whatever joy has filled your heart, whoever you are and whomever you love, you are welcome here. We have a few announcements today. There's going to be piano music by Deb Reed, if you remember her, a member of the church. Used to play a lot here. She's going to be at Touchmark at All Saints on Tuesday, April 2nd at 3 p.m. It'll be sacred and secular music. And so if you missed Deb Reed, there's a chance to hear her again. Also, we're going to have in your bulletin, there's an announcement about Singing Gongs with Mike Tamburo. He'll be here tomorrow night, April 1st, and tickets are $35. And it says to bring a yoga mat if you have one. Just see the info for information, and you can also talk to Allan for more information. And he has more information now.
So with this concert, some of you are familiar with Mike Tamburo, but he comes highly recommended. He was at Spirit of Peace earlier this year, I think, and he may have been here before. And he's been in contact with the lady who's done the singing bowls here, whose name I can't recall right now. Deb Yoder, thank you. And so she's helping us with the details. And so Deb Yoder will be here as well. Sandrine is going to be here as kind of the local host. And we need one more person to work with Sandrine, just to be a volunteer that's present, maybe handing out programs and welcoming people and stuff like that. So if there's somebody that could come by 6:45, you'll have a free ticket. So talk to me afterwards if you would be interested in that opportunity. And it's, as the announcement said, if you have a yoga mat, you can bring that, or maybe a pillow if you'd like to. We're going to clear out the chairs and have this floor open for sitting or lying in comfortable positions to enjoy these gongs, which it sounds like a really wonderful, powerful experience. And you can look at the website, which is printed, listed in the program announcement sheet. Thank you.
Are there any other announcements? And here comes Paul.
Our pledge campaign will be starting in 2 weeks on April 14th. We're going to have a light breakfast of one sort or another in that day, and we hope everyone will come and join us for that. 2 weeks, April 14th.
Thank you. So also remember to read the e-blast, and we have an announcement from Edie.
This is Edie Ann Hafke. I'm grateful to have Jenny with me in my life, and I'm grateful for all of you too, and I'm grateful to see snow on the ground, coming down on the ground, because we need all the moisture we can get. And I have a special request from anybody here who can give me a ride back to Brandon by about 4 o'clock from Sioux Falls, because I need to get back by supper time. So I would be grateful for doing that. And we will pay $5-10 for your time and for gas. All right, well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Also, remember our weekly email blast. And if you're not on the receiving our weekly emails, please sign up for them on the clipboard in the foyer before leaving. You're also invited to stay for the conversation, coffee, and a circle discussion after today's service. And just a note on that, I was asked to announce that we have fresh grape juice down there, and whatever is down left over at the end of the day, you're welcome to take it home. It doesn't last till the next week. Well, it's not as good the next week. Okay. Okay, and with that, we'll have our prelude. Thank you, Carol. And now we'll have our chalice lighting. And I'll be reading number 435 while the chalice is lit. We come together this morning to remind one another to rest for a moment on the forming edge of our lives, to resist the headlong tumble into the next moment until we claim for ourselves awareness and gratitude, taking the time to look into one another's faces and see their communion, the reflection of our own eyes. This house of laughter and silence, memory and hope is hallowed by our presence together. And now let's join in our first song, number 269, Lo, the Day of Days is Here. Our first reading today is number 510. O Spirit of life and renewal. And it's not written intentionally. Why don't we read the whole thing together? O Spirit of life and renewal, we have wintered enough, mourned enough, oppressed ourselves enough. Our souls are too long cold and burned. Our dreams are but forgotten, our hopes unheard. We are waiting to rise from the dead. In this, the season of steady rebirth, we awaken to the power so abundant, so holy, that returns each year through earth and sky. We will find our hearts again and our good spirits. We will love and believe and give and wonder and feel again the eternal powers. The flow of life moves ever onward through one faithful spring and another, and now another. May we be forever grateful. Alleluia. Amen. And at this time, we're going to have a story for all ages. Let's come forward. Any children or childlike persons? Will I get wired for sound here? That's my husband, childlike. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Okay, good. Well, today's story is about Ramona and Roberto and their dog Feliz. Once upon a time, a girl named Ramona and a boy named Roberto had a wonderful dog. They named the dog Feliz because he was so happy when they came home from school each day. Do you know what Feliz means? Do you, Scott? Well, it's Spanish for happy because the dog made them happy. So now you know a Spanish word, Feliz. He bounded toward them, barking and tail wagging madly. With their dog, Ramona and Roberto would roam their neighborhood. Sometime Feliz would run ahead chasing a squirrel. When they walked to the supermarket, sometimes bigger kids would try to tease Ramona and Roberto, but Feliz growled at them and the bigger kids left the children alone. They learned to walk and not be afraid when they walked with Feliz. They loved Feliz very much, and Feliz loved them. Then one day, Feliz got very, very sick. He must have eaten something very bad for him because he never got well, and he died. The children cried and cried, and then they found a place in the garden to bury him, and they wrapped up his body in a pretty scarf and covered him up with dirt and planted a pretty bush by the grave. And they thought about all the fun they had with Feliz and how much they missed him. A few days later, Ramona was walking home from school and a dog came bounding toward her, tail wagging. It reminded her a lot of Feliz. It's like Feliz is part of that dog too, she told her brother. Roberto saw a squirrel running like crazy across the schoolyard. It brought back memories of how Feliz chased squirrels. Do you suppose that squirrel saw Feliz's ghost? He said, and the children laughed. Ramona and Roberto had to walk through the neighborhood where the mean kids lived. The children remembered how confident they used to feel with Feliz at their heels. They decided to pretend that Feliz was walking beside them, and they walked bravely past the other kids. The bigger kids said some things, but Roberto and Ramona kept on going, thinking Feliz would be with them if he could be. That night they asked their dad, Do you think dogs turn into ghosts or angels or something when they die? I don't know, said Dad. You miss Feliz a lot, don't you? Yes, I miss brushing his coat. And I miss his silky ears and his waggly tail. Sometimes it seems like he's here somewhere, but just out of sight. Sometimes I see another dog and I think it's Feliz, said Ramona. Mother said, you still imagine him sometimes, don't you? How he was so friendly and playful, all the ways he was special to you. You can see him even when he isn't there. The children nodded. You can feel happy with for the wonderful dog he was, even though you are sad too. His love lives on in your memory. Maybe that's what it means, to live forever, remembering the friends you love and who love you, and letting that love fill you with happiness and live inside you. When you remember Feliz, part of him lives again in you. I like that, said Ramona and Roberto, and they smiled. Do you like that idea? Yeah? You ever had a pet? Did you lose a pet? No? Well, that's good. It's good to have them still with you. But remember, if you do lose something, you can always remember it in your heart. Now the children are going to stay in the service this morning, so we won't be singing them out. Am I still on the little mic? Can you hear me with the little mic? Okay. Okay. At this time, we're going to have joys and concerns. And we found it helpful in this congregation to share the ups and downs of our lives by the practice of taking a stone from a bowl, holding it in our hand, warming it, and then sharing our joy or concern and putting it into the bowl of water where it goes out to the greater community. So if you have a joy or concern you'd like to share, please come forward. And we have one person coming up now. You're welcome to come toward the front and stay up front for your turn.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul. 40 years ago when I started at the Ohio State University, we became friends with a fellow and his wife. She was in the department and he was her husband. Just 2 weeks ago, he won essentially the Math Nobel Prize. We used to, I remember him because we would get together with his family and make sushi together and drink a little wine, and he was pretty close to blind in both eyes. One of his eyes detached. So Wansuri and her husband, congratulations.
Hi, I'm Chuck, and I may or may not be getting hearing aids. Now, this is a good thing, I think, because if I don't need them, it'll be a good thing, and if I do need them, it will be a great help. So, it's kind of a two-edged thing, you know? And I'm real happy about it, and I don't know what color to get. I really don't, because... What? What color? Pink. Okay. Well, I'm not sure what color I'll get yet. But if I decide on skin color for white people, I will get those. And if I want to stand out in the crowd, I'll get black ones.
There, it's down.
And my name is Allan. I usually forget to say that. So a couple of stones of celebration. The first one is in honor of Liz, who did a nice job with the curtains downstairs. In case you haven't seen them, they were donated by somebody from the bridge group who didn't like the sun blaring in on sunny days, so I can't imagine why. But it was a nice donation, and Liz did a great job of installing them professionally, so thanks for that. And then the other one is a word of congratulations to Rebecca, who helps with our spiritual education program and gave a TED talk at her high school a week ago last night. She was the last one of 13, and I know they saved the best till last. I know I'm biased, but I hope you all get to hear it someday.
Anyone else? Then I'll take one last stone. This is to remember all the joys and concerns in our hearts that haven't been shared, but are still important to us. We'll have a moment of silence. We'll reflect on what we have heard in the joys and concerns. And also we could reflect on principle number 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregation. And now we'll move on to our second song, which is number 98, Loveliest of Trees. Our second reading is number 628. And this one is antiphonal, so we can, if you would please read the italics. In the tomb of the soul, we carry secret yearnings, pains, frustrations, loneliness, fears, regrets, worries. In the tomb of the soul, we wrap ourselves in the security of darkness. Sometimes it prepares us for experience. Sometimes it insulates us from life. In this season where light and dark balance the day, we seek balance for ourselves. And now we'll have the message.
I'll begin with kind of a disclaimer that I'm not intending to undermine anybody's faith or lack of faith or tell anybody what to think or what to believe, but simply to try to expand our awareness, expand our understanding, including our understanding of one another and why some of us think one way and some of us think another way. So you can choose your own beliefs or lack of beliefs, and you can certainly challenge me during the discussion afterwards. So you know that some cherished holiday customs are not biblical. Christmas trees, for example, come from a pagan Northern European custom of bringing evergreens inside during the winter. And when people were converted to Christianity, they kept the custom, and the church officials allowed it, and even blessed it, I guess. In the same way, the word Easter is not in the Bible. Easter comes from Ishtar, which is a Middle Eastern goddess that dates back to several hundred years before the Common Era, before the time of Jesus. There was also a god known in Greek as Adon, A-D-O-N, and this Greek god who died and was mourned extravagantly by women throughout the Middle East, again before the Common Era. And the word Adon means Lord, and similar to the Adonai in Hebrew. Well, the early Christians incorporated some of this language and some of these ideas and applied them to Jesus of Nazareth, that influential charismatic teacher who was revered and almost worshipped by the masses. So when you think about, we have to think about the context and how oppressive the Roman regime was for the people who were under them as subjects, and how miserable life was for the masses. In that context, and incidentally, I think probably the closest parallel that we can begin to imagine is the experience of black slaves in this country. So with that kind of existence, that kind of suffering, this world was so terrible, and so it's not hard to see why belief in an afterlife became so compelling for so many people who were oppressed. And so we have to think of the early Christian religion as the religion of the oppressed people, by oppressed people, for oppressed people. And they were convinced that something better had to be beyond the grave. And there also needed to be a place of punishment for all the bad guys, of course. So, religions of the ancient world had also developed stories of rescuers or saviors that would come down from heaven, live a good life, die, return to heaven, and then come back to life to tell everyone else how to get there. And so this too may have been an idea that was applied to Jesus of Nazareth. So even accounts in the New Testament leave room for mystery, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. Now I'm going to shift gears and talk about a subject that I've come to think deserves more attention. And I know that, for example, Pastor Ted Tollefson, who has spoken here many times, did a lot with dreams. And that's something that I've been interested in off and on, but mostly off lately. And if I were to think about it more, I think that's a subject that we all need to maybe pay more attention to, because we're so preoccupied with everything that we can see and experience and our five senses, but there's so much more. And when you think about the unconscious mind or the subconscious and all of the mystery that exists, I don't pay much attention to that, and maybe that's one lack in my own life. So I've had a chance to do some reading about this lately. So, for example, in Great Britain, in 1882, the Society for Psychical Research was started, and there were influential scientists involved, including the American psychologist William James. One of the first things they did was to take a sample of 17,000 people and ask them about experiences that were abnormal or paranormal, hallucinations and things like that, or apparitions. And about 10%, or 1,700 of the 17,000, claimed to have experienced some kind of hallucination or apparition. And there's also the phenomenon of automatic scripts or channeling. And so, for example, the Course in Miracles was said to be something that was channeled by a force from outside the person who wrote it down. And it's kind of a mysterious idea, and I've never really appreciated what I've read of it, and yet it is still a compelling force for a lot of people. And so some of these scientists were believers, and it seemed like it was partly an effort to show that there really was life after death. They had kind of an agenda. And then some of the critics were skeptical about that. So there have been a lot of different controversies with the Society for Psychical Research in Britain, but it does still exist today, and there's a similar one in this country as well. And then there's the phenomenon of apparitions of the Virgin Mary, which have become famous in some places. One was as far back as 1591. Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared to a shepherd and his uncle in Mexico. Then in 1571, 3 children of Fatima in Portugal. Not sure about that date. It doesn't sound like they were both, but anyway, that's another one. And then in 1981, 6 teenagers in Medjugorje, Bosnia-Herzegovina, were said to have seen the Virgin Mary. And one of them later came to Birmingham, Alabama to donate a kidney to her brother, and then she began having these visions in a field under a pine tree in 2012. And so these things keep cropping up. So anyway, there is, like I say, there's mystery to it when people have been, brought up in a very traditional and powerful belief system, and then somehow these apparitions can occur not just to one individual, but to more than one. And that, to me, is kind of interesting, to think that there is such a thing as collective apparitions. Well, now I'm going to shift gears and tell a couple of personal stories. The one is about 2 identical twins that I knew. We'll call them Lorene and Doreen. They were extremely close. As toddlers growing up, they developed their own language, which nobody else could understand for a while. And as adults, they would finish each other's sentences, and that would be frustrating for their families and others. Once they played a trick when one of them had a date, and she sent her twin sister to see if the guy could tell it was not her, and he didn't know it until he was kissing her goodnight. But anyway, they continued to be close in adulthood, and in their childbearing years, they were both pregnant at the same time with their second child. And in about the 8th month, Lorene said to her husband, they both married, Ed and Fred, I forgot to mention. Lorene said, "Fred, wake up. Doreen is having her baby." And Doreen indeed gave birth that night to a baby 6 weeks early. So he was put in the NICU, and he survived, even though that was quite a few years ago, and everything was fine. And then Lorene gave birth later, full term. Well, then fast forward several decades, and Doreen suddenly died of a brain aneurysm, and the two persons who had been closest to her were Lorene, her twin, and Fred, her husband. And so they turned to each other in their grief, and they soon married. And after another decade, Lorene died suddenly. And not one to be alone, Fred soon married Marlene, who never knew the twins, but she had ideas for remodeling the house where Fred and his two previous wives had lived. And after the project was finished, Marlene distinctly heard chattering and giggling in the hallway, and she insisted it wasn't just a dream. And so they surmised that Lorene and Darlene had come back to inspect the remodeling and give their approval, obviously, since they were giggling. And so from then on, the family called Marlene the mysterious triplet. Another story is more personal. I was accompanying a friend named Jean to visit her daughter and grandchildren. It was a pleasant visit and nothing unusual until we were about to leave. And at the door, Jean paused to look back at the grandchildren, and suddenly she screamed and then hurried out the door saying, "We have to go." And I thought perhaps she'd been stung by a bee or something, but no, she had caught a glimpse of her son who had died 5 years earlier. So when I got home that day, I looked up the word apparition because I thought I knew what it meant. And it appears that that's what she saw, an apparition of her deceased son. When I worked as a hospice chaplain several years ago, we would make follow-up visits after the death, and more than once I heard a widow say things like, yes, I've heard his voice at times, or I've heard his footsteps, or I've felt the presence of my late husband. And some of you may recall a couple of years ago on Easter, I gave a message and shared stories from this book by a forensic pathologist in Minnesota named Janice Amatuzio, who talks about experiences of people that she has met in her career as a pathologist, and the stories of people who have had unusual, coincidental experiences around the time of death. So these stories give me pause, and they also give me a lens through which to read the events and the accounts in the New Testament. So think about the traditional Easter story as you may have heard it over the years, and some details which you may have overlooked. For example, the first account is said to be from the Gospel of Mark, and that gospel ends rather abruptly. Chapter 16 has only 8 verses, and it says that the women went to the tomb and didn't find anyone, and they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And that's how it ends in the original ending of the Gospel of Mark, and then another ending was added later with more detail and some of the so-called visions that the various women had, including Mary Magdalene. And incidentally, it's interesting too that it was women who had these visions. The women were also at the foot of the cross. And when you think again about the political situation, the women weren't a danger, so they could be at the foot of the cross without being in danger themselves. And the men were afraid of the Roman soldiers, and so the men were not anywhere near. But the women weren't dangerous. So these women had this experience. Mary Magdalene didn't recognize Jesus, thought he was the gardener, until she heard her name. And then there's also the story of the two men on the way to Emmaus who were walking along, and somebody came along and caught up with them and asked them why they're so sad, and then they explained about the death of Jesus, and then this person talked to them about some of the history and the prophecies of the Hebrew Bible and so on. And then suddenly he disappeared, and then they said, "Were not our hearts burning within us as he was talking to us?" And so there was that mystical experience of thinking that maybe that had actually been the resurrected Jesus. So the point is, it wasn't so clear-cut as we're probably used to thinking about it. And so in those stories, there is ambiguity. I think there's room for questions. And even in the last portion of the Gospel of Matthew, when it's the Mount of Ascension, and it says that Jesus was there and the 11 disciples, but some doubted. And so there is that detail of doubt, even at that glorious ending of the Gospel of Matthew, which says, "Go into all the world and make disciples," but some were doubtful. So, if you have doubts about the resurrection, you're not alone. And if you have a firm belief in it, you're not alone. But there's a lot of room for questioning and wondering and mystery. And so even I came across a verse which I hadn't noticed before, which also relates to this. In 1 Peter 3:18, it says, "Jesus was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit." And I thought, well, that's a peculiar way to put it. Instead of insisting, as it says in more explicitly in other parts of the New Testament, that he really did rise from the dead physically, resurrection of the body, it says Jesus was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. And so it was certainly the spirit of this Jesus of Nazareth, this unpredictable, unconventional, magnetic rabbi who had a big influence on a lot of people. And so it was certainly his spirit which inspired the disciples, just as the spirit of the dog in the children's story could inspire those two children to walk with confidence when they went by the bad kids. So I'm going to conclude with a couple of extended quotations. One of them, it just occurred to me that it's the last day of Women's History Month, and we haven't mentioned that here, but here's a great book from our All Souls Library that had belonged to Perry Patterson, and it's signed by the author, "Women Without Superstition, No Gods, No Masters." And it's the collected writings of women free thinkers of the 19th and 20th centuries. So I commend that to you on this last day of Women's History Month. And here's a quote in that spirit, which kind of fits with the skeptical side of Easter. An author named Helen Gardner in 1885 wrote these words: I'm sometimes asked, what do you propose to give in place of this comforting faith? It makes people so happy. You take away all this blessing and you give nothing else in its place. What is your creed? It has never seemed to me that a creed was the staff of life. Human beings cannot live by creeds alone. I should not object, however, to a creed that would read something like this. I believe in honesty. I believe that a church has no right to teach what it does not know. I believe that a clean life and a tender heart are worth more to this world than all the faith and all the gods of time. I believe that this world needs all our best efforts and earnest endeavors 24 hours every day. I believe that if our labors were needed in another world, we would be in another world. As long as we are in this one, I believe in making the best and the most of the materials we have on hand. I believe that fear of a God cripples human intellect more than any other influence. I believe that humanity needs and should have all of our time, efforts, love, worship, and tenderness. I believe that one world is all that we can deal with at a time. I believe that if there is a future life, the best possible preparation for it is to do the very, very best we can here and now. I believe that love for our fellow human beings is infinitely nobler, better, and more necessary than love for God. I believe that men, women, and children need our best thoughts, our tenderest consideration, and our earnest sympathy. I believe that God can get on just as well without any of these as with them. If God wants anything, he can get it without our assistance. It is people with limitations, not gods without limitations, who need and should have our aid. I believe that it is better to build one happy home here than to invest in 1,000 churches which deal with a hereafter. If a life that embraces this line of action doesn't fit us for heaven, then such a heaven is not worth going to. So, a defiant woman of the 19th century. And now a contemporary quote from a UU minister who was trained at Harvard Divinity School, Molly Hausch Gordon, now serves at the Unitarian Universalist of Columbia, Missouri. And these are her words about Easter. Could Jesus really rise again? Could it really be that the violence of empire and the pain of loss would be denied the final world? In that ancient telling, we don't get an answer. There is no resolution. There is no certainty. There is only a seed of complicated hope and the persistence of human love to help it grow. What strikes me about the ancient text is that it was not only Jesus who rose up that morning, it was also the women who loved him, who rose up from the pit of their grief to tend to him. It was also the movement that his teaching sparked, a community who rose up to spread his message of power in weakness and the victory of love. Is new life possible? Is love stronger even than death? The question itself invites us to rise up and to live as though it were true, to make it true in our living. The lesson for the women, the lesson for the forces of empire, the lesson for us is this: you can crush love down, bury it, cover it over, but it will rise. It will reach for the sun, and we will reach for each other. Love will have the final word, even if that word is just a question, a wild possibility, a whisper to rise and follow wherever it may lead. Communities formed and nurtured in love will rise up for each other and with each other again and again. And that makes me think of the communities of love like the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay pride movement, the people of Ukraine, the people of Gaza, and all the places where love continues in spite of the various challenges and atrocities that take place. If we've learned nothing else in these years, it is this. Even when everything is uncertain, even when we are grieving, even when the loss keeps coming, even when we are forced apart, even when we are bone weary, we keep reaching for one another. We keep rising in love. May it be so for us.
And at this time, we'll have our offering with music by our own violinists, JC and Dan. Let's say together the words in our bulletin to receive the offering. We give these gifts freely. We receive these gifts gratefully. We dedicate these gifts to the work of our congregation, serving human wholeness, caring for our planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, loving one another. Now let's have our third song, number 266, Now the Green Blade Riseth. And out together, the chalice is extinguished. Out into the world.